Okay, Richard, I'd like to start. We've got a couple of issues that we'd like to bring up here, but I think if I can look back on that period, there was an international conference in Durban, South Africa, a United Nations conference that, in a way, one could almost say launched the demonization and delegitimization campaign against Israel that we're witnessing in full flower today. It started in Durban. You led our delegation. Leading up to it, there were some issues about whether the U.S. would attend, whether Jewish organizations should attend, because we knew what was coming. We'll pick it up from there.
Well, as B'nai B'rith International President, when you first entered the office, you realized that none of us reinvent the wheel. Somebody in B'nai B'rith International has already addressed certain issues. So long before I was president, in fact, shortly before I was born, B'nai B'rith became the first Jewish non-governmental organization at the United Nations. We have been there from the beginning at every level of the United Nations. And so fast forwarding to 1975, when the United Nations adopted the Zionism-Racism resolution, B'nai B'rith was there strongly speaking out against it and working to battle on the grounds of the United Nations the castigation of Israel at every level. In 1985, 10 years later, Phyllis and I, my wife Phyllis and I, were asked to be BBI delegates by Jerry Kraft, as I recall, to the United Nations Conference on Women in Nairobi. And we met with a small Jewish delegation there at the Nairobi Hebrew congregation. But the fact of the matter is, although there were 200 Jewish people at this conference that had thousands of people, the conference, instead of being about women, was all about anti-Semitism, anti-Zionism, anti-Israelism, and that was the focus of that conference. So when the United Nations called for the UN Conference on Racism in Durban, South Africa in 2001, I was honored to be both the BBI president and head of delegation for that and the coordinating board of Jewish organizations. But also, because we held numerous seats and the ability, because of our staff in Geneva and at UNESCO in Paris and of course in New York, and the great relationships and history of B'nai B'rith, when we asked for something, we got it. So we asked for many, many, many delegate seats, and then we called ADL and said, you don't have status at the UN, we will accredit the ADL delegation. And we did, and we called Jewish Women International, formerly B'nai B'rith Women, and said, you don't have status, and we will accredit you. And we worked with Hadassah and other organizations. The moral of the story is we went there to Durban for the UN Conference on Racism. It was just 10 days or so before 9/11. Little did we know what was about to happen. The conference was a terrible anti-Semitic conference. It indeed tried to reinstate the Zionism-Racism resolution in UN documents. It indeed caused the President of the United States to instruct the ambassador of the United States to walk out of the conference. The Israel ambassador walked out, and I was honored to lead the walkout of all of the Jewish organizations. But I well remember when we had the vote as to whether or not we would all agree to walk out. We were in a particular room off-site, and all the Jewish organizations met. And I chaired the meeting, and somebody from one of the organizations said, it is not right that B'nai B'rith International has so many votes here in the meeting. And they said that just shouldn't be. And I said, no problem, everybody can vote from their own delegation. And so B'nai B'rith Chile stood up and voted to walk out. And B'nai B'rith Canada stood up and voted to walk out. And different countries from B'nai B'rith Europe voted to walk out. And as you went around the room, all of a sudden it was clear that B'nai B'rith at the United Nations is the most respected voice. It continues as the most respected voice. We did the Durban conference in 2009. We did a Durban review conference. In 2011, we did a 10-year commemoration. What has gone on at the UN has been a branding of Israel as an apartheid, racist, criminal state. It didn't just start at Durban, but it was enhanced by Durban, it was advanced by Durban, and it is the language that is used today everywhere. It even, you can hear about it today as negotiations go on between Israel and the Palestinians under the work of Secretary Kerry. Because just the other day, Secretary Kerry was interviewed by a Palestinian reporter and an Israeli reporter, and he said, if these negotiations fail, there will be a third intifada. If these negotiations fail, the wall, the settlements, the this and the that, everything as Israel's fault. Unfortunately, we all have to, therefore, stand with Israel from every one of our communities in the United States, every one of our countries around the world, because we are the most constant voice respected in the halls of every single United Nations venue around the world.
I want to turn to a domestic issue. We've had some terrible incidents over the last 20 years, some terrible incidents of violence in this country. Newtown, we think of. There are a number of others. There was the Columbine massacre in Colorado. B'nai B'rith responded. Pick it up from there.
You know, like so many of you, so many of my fellow honorary presidents, I came out of the VBYO program. It's 50 years since I had the privilege of serving as the first chairman of CALA, the leadership training program for BBYO, at Camp B'nai B'rith in Starlight, Pennsylvania. And one of the things that we were taught is what then was called social action. We would call it being involved. We would call it leadership. We would call it leadership by example. As one of the presidents said, leadership ahead of its time. But we have been there and we continue to be there with initiatives. What occurred in the Columbine massacre was a shooting in a school. And it really was almost unheard of at the time. It was beyond everyone's conscience. So we gathered together both professional staff as well as volunteer leaders, and we pulled together a program that we named Enlighten America, Enlighten the World. And that became a mantra over the course of the remainder of my presidency. But it included the outreach, for example, in Argentina. You've heard so much about it, because when there was the crisis, the economic crisis in Latin America, particularly in Argentina, we created the initiative called the Communities in Crisis campaign, along with the Brothers Brother Foundation, where, as you already know, we gathered together the pharmaceuticals and we delivered them to Argentina. And I will never forget being in the cargo hangar when the jet landed and they were unloading pallets with the B'nai B'rith logo on the side. The reporters wanted to know, these pharmaceuticals, they're for the Jewish community. And we said, no, they're for the Ministry of Health. They're for all the hospitals. They're for all of the people of Argentina. And not until we actually delivered them to the Catholic hospitals did the press then begin really to write about it. And the writing that they did was all about our commitment as a humanitarian service organization to the betterment of all people. And the Communities in Crisis campaign has done a marvelous job working with Brothers Brother Foundation. But it's not just isolated, because you have to put it in context of our tremendous commitment, for example, in Latin America, where we achieved status at the Organization of American States, where we opened the first Mercosur office, where we established the first B'nai B'rith International Director of Latin American Affairs. And that can be repeated in every part of the world with what B'nai B'rith has done with initiatives responding immediately to action when there is a need. With 9/11, when we toured the World Trade Center bombing site, people were so appreciative that B'nai B'rith was there. When we delivered a check, it was thank you, thank you, thank you. But it also made a difference when we delivered a check through disaster relief to Turkey to help rebuild after an earthquake.
With regard to the Argentine situation, I remember visiting Argentina at that time, and this was the economic impact in Argentina was, of course, devastating to those under the poverty level, but there was also tremendous middle-class poverty almost overnight, and we responded quickly. Just one, go ahead.
There you go.
Okay, I wanted to move to another subject, but go ahead.
Well, I mean, there's a lot been said about Argentina. It's the largest Jewish community in Latin America. So you've already heard about the 1992 embassy bombing and the 1994 AMIA Jewish Center bombing. I won't repeat any of that, but there are two stories worthy of you knowing, and they're both very short. First of all, the site of the Israel embassy in Buenos Aires was going to be sold for a commercial building. And B'nai B'rith International, working with B'nai B'rith Argentina and B'nai B'rith Latin America and others, came together. We helped raise all of the money. We bought the site, and then we created I don't know what it's now called, the Embassy Square, or whatever we called it. And later, when we were dedicating the square, and this is the second and really wonderful point, I remember being received in the Embassy of Israel in Argentina. And I looked in the lobby when we arrived, and there was this gorgeous menorah. And I said to myself and those that were with me, I think, I said, that's the B'nai B'rith menorah. To make a long story short, that when the Israel embassy was bombed in 1992, one thing was left standing intact. It's the B'nai B'rith menorah that was given in 1949. We made the arrangements to move that menorah to Embassy Square when we dedicated it in the presence of the President of Argentina. And I am sure, given the time, every one of us would have story after story about things that we've done in U.S. communities, in North America, Latin America, Europe, down under, everywhere, of meaningful things where people realize we indeed have made a difference and continue to do so.
We've got two more to go, and there's one issue which I think Moish and Richard kind of share in common. So I'm gonna move it to a little bit further on. Speak to Joel. We'll get to Moish, and we'll come back to this unnamed issue, which the two of you have played a great important role in.